Welcome back to Project Kia, the project where I assemble my own 4-seat RZR from used parts and a worn-out 2-seater. Get it? Because I have to assemble it. In part 1, I took this car apart and replaced its front frame with one from a 4-seater, and was eventually left with this. I'm ready to start putting it all back together, but first things first, I need to replace the main carrier bearing. Super ATV has a great video on how to do this, so I'm just going to show you the basics. Next up is the front differential. With nearly 6,000 miles on it, these bearings are done. I press all 3 bearings out and replace them with new SKF bearings from Sandcraft. This flimsy roll pin needs to be punched out and replaced with a solid one. I replace all the seals with the ones that came in the kit and start putting it all back together again. Now is as good a time as any, I guess, to talk about spring rates. A 4-seat RZR is a little more than 200 pounds heavier than a 2-seater. The stock 4-seat springs are stiffer mainly to hold the extra weight of the passengers. This RZR came with silver eyebox springs, which are kind of an in-between, and I hope that since my back seat passengers are about 50 pounds combined that they would work, but no matter how I adjusted them, they were always way too soft in the front. I eventually switch out the top tender springs with stock red ones from a 4-seater, and that seems to be working well. If you're going to stretch a RZR, you will definitely need to change out the front springs. You may be able to get away with just adding more preload to the back, but if you can find a full set of 4 springs, definitely go that way. The internal valving in the shocks is also a little bit lighter in the 2-seaters than it is in a 4-seater. Since I'm mainly just trail riding with kids, I don't think I'm going to change this as I like the smoother ride. After lining up the drive shaft with the differential, punch this pin into the little hole. Out of all of the parts that I had to find to make this project, these coolant tubes were the hardest to get. Used, they're always bent, or dinged up, or broken, or leaking. And new, I had to order 3 different sets until I finally got a pair that wasn't bent and shipping. They use the same brackets front and back as the 2-seater, but there are additional clips in the middle to keep them together. With the cooling system fully installed and the body panels off, this would have been a good time to bleed the air out of the system. But did I do that? No! Did I wait until the car was nearly finished and it was almost impossible to do? You betcha! I did, however, take some pretty pictures of the RZR. So that's at least a little helpful. Anyways, I found a pretty good deal on a wiring harness from 2020. In retrospect, it would have been cheaper and easier to cut, splice, and extend the original harness, but the 2019 and newer cars had the fuse box under the dash, and I like that way better than where they were in the previous cars under the seat. I also had to relocate the rectifier to the front. I made this little bracket out of some angle iron that gets sandwiched between the frame and the bumper bracket. It turns out the wires on the starter are very hard to get to. Be good to your starter, they suck to replace. If you watch carefully on the left side, you can see the throttle body slides out when I tighten it down. I did not have it in all the way. This eventually actually caused a tear in the intake boot, and I had to replace it down the road. Here's a fun little surprise. In 2018, Polaris stopped using a 4-pin straight and went to a 4-pin square type plug for the O2 sensor. Now I'm going to need another O2 sensor. In 2019, the taillight wiring harness plug switched from 4 pins to 8 pins. The extra wires are for the rear backup camera if you want to add one on. There's also a plug for a third middle taillight. This gives me the option to upgrade to the newer style rear bumper later on, but for now, I'm going to use that third plug to power my license plate light. I have no idea if a 2015 computer from a 2-seat will work in a 4-seat 2020 harness, but I'm really hoping that it does. To relocate the fuse box under the dash, I need to cut a 4-inch wide hole with a 1-inch wide strip down the middle. It also gives me a chance to use my compass, which is fun because it's a tool I don't get to use very often. I cut that strip way too far to the right, but thankfully this grommet is very forgiving and it's going to work out just fine. I already had a rear seat frame bracket for a 4-seater just laying around, so I used it, but there's no reason why I couldn't have just used the 2-seat frame with the mounts in the middle cut off. To make the mount for the fuse box, I made a cardboard template and then cut it back further and further until I had the shape that I wanted. I copied it over to metal, bent it up, and welded it onto the back of the frame. It turned out really nice. I think it looks really cool. It's a shame no one will ever see it again. Since I like the convenience of shifting my own gears, I'm putting on a longer shifter cable to reach the front seats. When installing the battery, if you do the positive side first, you don't have to worry about your wrench shorting out to the frame. The cage I'm going to be putting on is from a 4-seat Turbo S. It came with all of its own hardware, so all I have to source are these 2 bolts at the bottom. If you do need to buy your own hardware, make sure it's all grade 10 if it's going on the roll cage. When installing a frame, leave the bolts loose until you get all of the pieces in and all the bolts started. Then you can torque them all down. That little bit of extra wiggle room just makes it so much easier to get everything where it's supposed to be. These 2 screws are different than all of the rest. The longer machine thread screw goes up here on the top. If you have a turbo, this can also be used to open up your secondary sheave doing a belt change. The coarse thread one goes down here into the plastic. It's probably worth noting that I also had to replace my 4-wheel drive switch. In 2019, Polaris switched from the standard switch to one with a pigtail coming off of it. I believe this is to waterproof and seal it, and it's the same as the one on the Highlifter. I'm not sure why they felt the need to change it on the 1000 because they didn't change it on the Turbo or the Turbo S. Here's a piece of random trivia for you. Polaris only painted the B-pillar plastics on model year 14 and 15. They only came in 4 different colors, so I was super excited when I found a set of Havasu red ones near me. I came up with this solution a while back to use 3-point harnesses on the back of a Turbo S. You use a longer bolt, 2 washers, and a sleeve. It allows you to bolt the factory rear seat belt right onto the C-pillar. This is a must for me because I need to be able to put car seats in the back of mine, and a 4-point harness is not very conducive to putting in a car seat. Here you can see the project lead and project manager coming in to inspect my work. They're not always super helpful when they're around, but I do like them. And at the end of the day, I'm doing this project for them so that we can spend more time together. Similar to putting the cage together, when you put the doors together, get all of the bolts started, keep them all loose, close the door, Fit the door to where you want it, and then tighten everything down. It's the quickest and easiest way to adjust the doors. These doors weren't my first pick, but I found a good deal on them. They were close by to me, and they already had the lower doors installed to them, so couldn't pass that up. Overall, they're really starting to grow on me, and I actually think that they match this RZR better than the 2019 RZR 1000 Ride Command that they came off of. So with the doors on, I'm basically done. Just to recap, this is the RZR that I started out with. This is a Photoshop version of what I thought it would look like when I was done, and this is the finished product. I'm really happy with how it turned out. When I started this project, I really thought that when I finished, it would look like I mixed together 30 different RZRs to build it. Which I did, but honestly, I think it looks like a factory machine. You can't tell that it was ever a two-seater. In part 3, I'm going to take it out for a ride, tell you some of my impressions of how it changed from being a two-seat to a four-seat, things I like, things I don't like, and things I learned along the way. Also, I'll go into my motivations for why I wanted a four-seater in the first place. Mainly, it's this reason. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and follow along for part 3.